Single-hand spey casting, a beginner's guide. The equipment. So which rod should I be using? Well, when you single-hand spey cast, any rod will work. Whether it's a 2-weight or a 10-weight, it's basically all the same. Generally speaking, a longer rod will perform better because it will give you more leverage to perform casts and will help you control the head. So which rod is best for single-hand spey casts? A fast-action rod or a slow-action rod? Today's rods are basically all fast compared to last generation of rods. It really comes down to personal preference, but I'll try to offer some insight on my own experience. The rod that I use is considered a fast rod in today's market, and I find it great. I also spent a lot of time this year using an ultra-fast 8-weight and found that to be great as well. My personal favorite, however, is a 4-weight rod, which is considered a medium fast, and personally I love casting that one the most. Again, it all comes down to personal preference, and since I'm moving between rods all the time, I do have to make small adjustments when I pick up another rod. To sum it all up, any rod will work, and what is even more important than the rod is the line. The line is arguably the most important element to a rod setup, and especially true for spey casting. It's common to see people trying 3 or 4 different lines before deciding on one. I personally use a 9-foot rod for most of my single-hand spey casting. The shortest I use is a 5-weight, 8-foot 10 inches, and the longest I use is a 10-foot 4-weight. From experience, the 10-foot rod casts better than the others, and the action is similar, but the extra foot really helps give it that extra power. Lines. This topic is probably the single most complicated topic in fly fishing equipment, so I'm going to go into detail about it. So let's talk about line sizes and grain weights. In today's market, the line weights really don't mean anything. For instance, most manufacturers will overline their advertised lines. It's common to see a 6-weight line lined much heavier than the standard AFTM standard weight. For example, Rio Gold, which is 1/2 line heavier, the Rio Grande, which is 2 weights heavier, or the Rio Outbound Short, which is lined 3 weights heavier. So next time you're looking for a line, don't pay too much attention to the classical 3-weight, 4-weight, 5-weight symbol on the box. Just read the grain weight. This will tell you exactly what you're getting. The reason why manufacturers do this is because the rods have become much faster, and to help load the rods they need more weight. That's why the line weights have become heavier. Let's talk about head lengths. So what is head length? Basically, all fly lines today have a head in exception to a double taper line. The head is the area which comprises of the most weight. This is the area that will cause your rod to bend, thus creating stored energy for when you deliver your cast. All fly lines have different head lengths, so when spey casting, it's important to pick one that will allow you to have enough weight or line outside of your rod guides to load your rod on the cast. Head lengths is a very complicated subject in spey casting, so I'll try to shorten the next little bit. Before I go any further, I want to explain how the head lengths relate to spey casts. When you perform a spey cast, you will need to have a certain length of line outside of the rod guides. This line will anchor in the water somewhere. In combination of the head weight and head length on the water, it will create surface tension when performing a cast. This tension will be used to load the rod to deliver the cast. In summary, the head length has a lot to do with spey casting. There are 3 classifications for head lengths in spey casting. Number 1, spey. So spey lines or mid-belly, full-belly lines, they are generally 50 feet or longer. For single-hand spey casting, you will not be using a spey line, so just know that these are out there, they serve a purpose, but for single-hand spey casting, it's not what you're going to be using. The next line classification is Scandinavian lines. You've probably heard the term Scandi line before, and that's just short for Scandinavian. The head lengths are in the 30 to 50 feet range. A short Scandinavian line is on the lower end of the spectrum at around 30 to 40 feet. This length is more in line with what we need. Scandi lines have long tapers for elegant presentation, and because the taper is long, they're not meant to throw weighted flies or big sink tips. It generally works best with small flies, soft hackle, small buggers, and things like that. And the final line classification is Skagit Lines. Skagit Lines are the shortest of them all. You can probably find them around 15 to 30 feet in length. This is probably the line that you'll be using when you're doing single-hand spey casting. The lines are very compact, concentrating most of the weight over a short area, thus making the lines able to throw weighted flies and heavy sink tips. Saying that, if you're casting a 5-weight rod, the line is just too light and you're not going to be able to throw very heavy lines or very heavy flies. The general rule is it takes weight to throw weight. So what that means is you're going to need a heavy weighted fly line in order to throw a heavy weighted streamer or a heavy sink tip. I hope that removed a lot of confusion about spey lines. The most important thing to take out of this is for single-hand spey casting, a shorter head will be much easier to handle. So for single-hand spey casting, a Skagit head or a short Scandi head is what you'll be using. So we aren't done with fly lines yet. The next important thing to talk about is head systems versus integrated lines. So what is a head system? What this means is the entire fly line is comprised of two independent sections connected using a loop-to-loop connection. The head section, which we talked about earlier, is the workhorse. This is the part of the line that performs the cast. This section is then connected to the running line via loop-to-loop connection. The running line is completely leveled, and when the cast is performed, it basically goes along for the ride. Before I move on, I thought I would just mention something about running lines. There are numerous types of running lines out there with their advantages and disadvantages. Talking about those is a video all in itself. Just know that the head systems is a two-part system with the head and the running line. The great thing about the head system is that you can change out the head depending on the kind of fishing you'll be doing. Lots of guys carry various heads for different situations. Those could be a Skagit head, a short Scandi line, an intermediate Skagit head. The possibilities are endless. With this system, you can change out the head easily. The main disadvantage to this system is the loop-to-loop connection. And if you have fly fished before, you know how annoying these can get. And finally, the integrated system. As the name suggests, the full line is one piece, where the head and running line are welded together to form a clean, uninterrupted, smooth connection. The price of these lines is more than your average fly line. It's basically the price of a head and running line together. So that's basically a rundown on spey lines and the various types there are. So let's talk about choosing the right spey line for your single-hand rod. From talking to people and reading forums, I believe that most single-hand spey casters utilize the head system. The most popular being the OPST Commando heads and Airflow Scout. These heads are pretty short, they're less than 20 feet, and are said to help beginners learn the spey process. I've only used the Scout myself and feel it's a great line and you can definitely bomb cast out there. The great thing about the lines is they are made for single-hand rods and switch rods, therefore it's easy to match the correct head with your rod and you won't be needing to experiment with lots of different lines. Personally, I'm not a fan of the Scout line or Commando line because they utilize the head system, and I feel this approach is too specialized for a single-hand rod. If all you want to do is swing streamers and strip streamers, that's great, but sadly, it's not good for much else. The lines do not overhead cast very well, they are tougher to mend, and do not offer elegant presentations. So that's why I prefer an integrated line for a single-handed rod. Combine those factors with the loop-to-loop connection, it gets annoying fast when stripping a line and playing fish. So for those reasons, I prefer the integrated line. The most popular integrated line is the Rio Outbound Short. Rio markets this line as a standard overhead casting line, but prices it as if it's an integrated line. It's actually both, an integrated shooting head. This line is very popular for its versatility, and it overhead casts very well. It's important to talk about the weight of the line. The line weights are completely out to lunch. For instance, the 6-weight line is actually 235 grains. This is the standard 9-weight lines, so that's 3 weight lines heavier. So going back to what I said about line weights listed on the box, don't read them because they don't tell you everything. Pay attention to the grain weights. Okay, so we established that the Rio Outbound Short is a great overhead casting line, but is it good for spey casts? I used the 8-weight 330 grain model on my 8-weight rod and love it. The head length is a little longer and tough to control, but it works. With a head length of 30 feet, it's on the upper balance for a comfortable single-hand casting line. Because of the short taper, it's great for heavy sink tips and weighted flies. I highly recommend this line. If you're just starting out, it may be a little more difficult, but it should be fine. The extra few feet shouldn't matter too much, and as you get better, you'll find it's easy to cast. One of the other lines I really like is the airflow switch float. This line is another one of the integrated lines. This line is made for switch rods but works excellent for single hand rods. I use it on my 5-weight and my 6-weight rod. I used a 3-weight, which is at 210 grains, for my 5-weight, and I used a 3.5 weight, 240 grain for my 6-weight. The head is about 26 feet, so it's shorter than the Rio outbound short, so it's easier to manage. What I like most about the line is that it has a long taper, which is great for delicate presentations. I don't plan to use the rods for throwing large streamers, so the line works perfect for me, but if you do want to throw large streamers, look into the Rio outbound short. They make a 5-weight version, which is around 210 grains, and that is more than capable for throwing large streamers. Another great thing about the lines I mentioned is they clearly show where the head begins by a color change on the fly line. This is great because it allows you to keep the exact amount of line outside the guides when you perform your cast. It will help make things more consistent while you learn. If you decide to get a fly line that doesn't have this, you can always measure out the line and mark it yourself using a Jiffy marker. By now you're probably getting the picture. You can use any fly line to single-hand spey cast. The most important thing are the head length and the line weight. So to recap, use a fly line with a head length less than 30 feet. Of course you can always go longer, but it just makes things more difficult. And if you're starting out, I would go with a shorter line. Next is the line weight. As a beginner, it's a good idea to use heavier lines. The lines I recommended really load the rods that I use, and as a beginner, it really is important because you will make mistakes. Heavier lines will be more forgiving. As you progress with your technique, you may find you prefer lighter lines, but again, that's all personal preference. The general rule for finding a good single-hand spey line is to overline your rod 2 to 3 line weights heavier. As a beginner, I'd lean towards the heavier weight. So here is a chart depicting each rod weight and a good grain window for that rod. This basically sums up the introductory equipment guide to single-hand spey casting. Of course, there are more to spey casting than the equipment, but I believe choosing the right fly line will make things a lot easier. I hope you enjoyed watching this video and it proves to be helpful. Thanks for watching.